So welcome to my Eros at Work project, Nina. Today I'm talking with Nina Smolyar, and she and I met in a completely other context in some of our work in terms of activating a visionary, emergent future. And in those conversations, I learned that Nina is a dancer in the Contact Improv community. She lives in Western Mass. And so I wanted to talk to more people in the Contact community about one of my favorite topics, which is really about boundaries, working with boundaries. And so that's why I asked Nina to join me on this call. How else would you like to introduce yourself, Nina? Who are you right now?
Oh, a big question on a spontaneous tip. That's a lovely introduction. I like, being able to inhabit both of those spaces where we intersect. So I'm someone who, is forging a way ahead to live really in a different way than the mainstream. I'll add another thing to the two pieces you already mentioned, which is that I'm also in graduate school at University of Vermont, studying leadership, ecological leadership for sustainability. And I just finished my first semester, which is really exciting, and looking forward to the whole journey there as well. And it very much interweaves with both of the contexts in which Allison and I are getting to know each other. So.
Mm-hmm. And you said there's a second one.
What would second? Well, the two are the systems change work and the dancing, through this project that you're interviewing me for at the moment.
Yeah. So here's my inquiry and curiosity. When I've been looking at this Eros question, what is Eros? And so I've been using the definition of creative life force. And one of the things I've seen, I think you were on the call when I mentioned the lava lamp thing. Yeah. So one of the things.
I was on the call where Ben mentioned that you had mentioned it. I think in a different call. I'm not sure I was on that call.
Yeah.
But I know the lava lamp has been in the field now.
Right. Exactly. So I have this image that there are these. If you consider all of us we have edges in terms of literally there's a place where the apparent body ends. The surface of my skin contains this body, so there's a way in which we've got edges that are pretty clear, and then we've got these boundaries. It's almost as if when the boundaries are in some ways just as clear. Them when the person has sort of bumped up against them, but they're not necessarily they're not obvious. You may not even be thinking of them all the time. So in the contact world, I think that's because you are literally dealing with the edge of the body, and then you're dealing with these boundaries. And I think I just would love to hear some of your stories about being in that space, some of the things that you've seen get stirred up, some of the experiences you've had in terms of that expansive place. For me, that's part of what draws me into contact or dance in general, is because I love entering this really expansive space where something happens, and then I know when the boundary arises, because it's as if it's a thing that once it gets pushed on, there's a kind of retreat that happens. So what's your experience?
Sure. So dancing for me is a really important primary mode of self-expression and embodiment. And so I moved out to Western Massachusetts for the Contact Improv community from Boston 7 years ago or so. So that was key. And when I first began dancing regularly, part of what I discovered, which was challenging, was that I am blurry about my own boundaries. And that really colors the experience initially in a way that I couldn't verbalize, in part because I wasn't skilled at discerning and asserting my own boundaries. And so in contact improv can be healing in many ways, and one of the ways is it like shines a light onto this like particular thing of like, I need this for my self-care and well-being, and I don't know how to do this. And so it also provides an opportunity to learn, which, is, it could be lovingly labeled as an AFGO, if you know that acronym. Do you know this acronym? So if I can swear, it's another fucking growth opportunity, which I really like, because it, points to like, yeah, I need to grow, but it's fucking hard and painful to do this growth. So let's see. So, oh gosh, where to start?
Can we pause right there, because that's already huge.
Yeah, there's a lot already there. Yeah.
I think it says a lot for any of us, but the way in which you're talking about it for yourself, as bringing yourself into this space, going in for the pleasure of it, the enjoyment of it. This is for my self-care, my self-expression, and then discovering, oh, here it is, the boundary, the growth edge. And then just what you said, I love that place around, I know I need this, and therefore I have to figure this out.
Yeah. And then, another thing that would come up is seeing potentially, so what I would experience sometimes is people pushing my boundaries, they not necessarily knowing it, them not being willing or able to read my body's response as a no, or as a like back off, and then me not being able to discern that, like connect the feeling of my body to, oh, this is what's happening, oh, and I need to say it because this message isn't getting across. So that was happening. And then other times I would think about if I was pushy but not realizing it either, with someone else. So there's so much opportunity to get into those messes, like these like growth opportunity messes, within contact improvisation. And I'm now in the past, let's say month, have been in a pretty intense, explicit, verbalized process with a particular member, a man in the community, and really calling out his behavior, his energetics, and his internal attitude based on his responses to me and to other people. And so that's like a, light years apart from what I would be capable of doing when I first started dancing in this community. So that it's kind of astonishing that it's like 7 years apart, in a way. And actually, I took some time off. There was a time where I deliberately backed off and I was not dancing regularly, in part because the accumulation of like these minor violations, this is all unconscious at the time, but it's now in hindsight, I'm realizing what it was just too taxing and created too much aversion within me to keep going back. And because there were no spaces, like there is an opening for one now, but before there were no spaces to like bring this up, verbalize this to anyone, because there was no really good container. So I just stopped going because I was grossed out, frankly. And I would see this happening to other women as well. And so that would, just like too much muscly, too much touching when there was no relationship of that sort that was established. So it just felt like unconsciousness coming in, usually in the form of men. Like most of the violations were from men, explicit, and like some were major, some were like kind of icky. Anyway, I'm rambling. Let me see. Let me find a thread here. Where am I going with this?
I have something if you want.
Yeah, please, because there's like a web. I'm just talking at it.
Well, I'd be interested to hear some specifics around how you are, like what's happening right now that you're in this intentional process. What does that process look like?
Yeah, it's basically made possible by one specific jam facilitator, let's say his name is Mike, doing the stepping up that I was talking about earlier, to hold a conscious intention of co-creating a consent-based culture within the contact improvisation community, which is a very, very needed infusion of accountability and safety within the larger, like within the form. So there is this particular person, I have been triggered by him for at least a year, and he was probably part of the reason I stepped away. And ironically, I've actually never danced with him before. It is how he is in the space. Like he has a style where he's very big. He like runs up to a person, including me, and then stops really short. At one point, it was so intense for me, and it felt so aggressive. I actually screamed in fear, because that was combined with like me really being incredibly averse to being touched by him, and just like the amount of energy that's coming at me that I have to like resist one way or another. So that like kept generating like like a storage of aversion and frustration. And there was one point at a jam several months ago where there were like people rolling around, and I generally do my best to avoid him, but this was like, you can't completely, control that 100% perfectly all the time. And I felt like he was like trying to grab my ankles. And again, by that point, it's the intensity of the energy accumulated over many, many months. And also what I know about his behavior from other people who've related it to me. Finally something broke through, and it like that combined with the fact that this jam facilitator, Mike, has been, I've been seeing how conscious he is in creating safety in his attempts at creating safety within the spaces, or maximizing safety. So it felt like, okay, I just need to say something to Mike. So that began a process of, I had several conversations with Mike about talking to this person. Let's call him, I don't know, Drew. And so that I can go more into what's been happening exactly, if that will feel useful. But I don't need to, if that's enough information. So now there's like several conversations, and it keeps kind of like moving around as to what's going to happen. But
are you in direct conversation with the person who's been with Drew? Yeah.
So what happened was that Mike and I had several conversations. Mike was going to talk to Drew, but with holidays and family, he was not getting around to it. And it began to be really frustrating for me, because I came to a jam and I just couldn't actually dance that day because Drew was there. So this is like my own, and the piece of that's my responsibility in all of this is that I waited this long. So, and again, I in some ways I kept hoping it would stop, and I kept hoping it would stop, that it would stop bothering me. And also, again, there was just no container into which to like assert my grievances. So that's like some explanations. But the bottom line is my intensity like is caused a lot also by the fact that I've been like holding it for so long. So I got to a point where it wasn't okay for me to wait anymore for someone else to talk to him, because I was being limited to where I can go and dance, as opposed to this person whose behavior is inappropriate. He was not being limited, and it's his behavior that's inappropriate, and limits should be placed on him and not me. So I kind of got to that point. It took me a while, and it actually with somebody else's help. I didn't get to exactly like that on my own. So I told Mike, look, if Drew is there tonight, and you're not, I'm just going to talk to him myself and let him know to stay away from me, basically. And Drew was very supportive. He said, I can't be there tonight, but if you can get a witness just to help you, that would be great. And I didn't, want to do that, because it's, as you may like understand, just the stress and the whatever energy that it takes to explain to yet another person what's going on. And like, about how I'm feeling violated or uncomfortable with someone. It's just more than I felt like dealing with. I just knew I was, at that point, I got pretty prepared during the day to talk to him and just say, your energy makes me uncomfortable. Please just stay away from me. And just, I knew it was going to get into a pretty bad narcissistic, self-aggrandizing conversation and defensiveness, because again, I've seen him interact and I know his history with other people. And so I was prepared to walk away. So that was my first direct conversation with him several weeks ago. And it went horrible. I mean, it was like, ugh, it was his instincts, I think, are upside down. I kept backing away from him and he kept getting closer to me. And like, even that was activating. So during that jam, he was basically gaslighting. What he would do is he would back into me and then I would confront him. I actually confronted him once on the dance floor. Like, this is what I'm talking about. I was over there. You were over there. I came over here and now you're over here. I need you to stay away from me. And then he started arguing. And I would interrupt him and say, no, like, this isn't a negotiation. You just need to stay away from me. And like, people were witnessing this. And then he was bizarre. My kind of strategy to help myself with that is that at that point, I just kept texting Mike, who wasn't there. Like, I'm like, look, I'm just documenting. You don't need to respond. I'm just documenting. This is what just happened over and over and over again. So then the next day, Mike and I talked twice, like really intensive, long conversations about what to do. He also talked to Drew, and then Mike told, and then so I talked to Mike before and after Mike talked to Drew, and Mike confirmed that Drew was pretty self-aggrandizing. Another thing that we heard is that Drew believes he's a sexual healer for women. Which to us who talk about it think it's like the most delusional, toxic, dangerous thing that can be happening in his head, but it explains his behavior. And again, and I was, just to maybe bring more context to it, if it's not yet clear, I definitely have not been the first person to complain about Drew's behavior at all. I mean, there have been incidents. There's been like, that were poorly handled. There's been a bunch of stuff. So it kind of feels like my like intense need to not have him in my, actually at this point, like not even in the space at all, for me to feel safe, is kind of like it's like all these other people's energies, that women's energies that felt violated, that were not really properly handled, because he's kind of a predator and he really shouldn't be there in certain ways. So that just kind of came to the fore. Like, I did this like very intense thing. Like, I dropped this bomb on his head, which for him was really a surprise, because he says he doesn't even know who I am, which I can sort of believe. So then what happened is that Drew was not allowed to come to the jam that night, which feels really hard for me to assert as myself, as a woman, whatever, internalizing the part about like deferring to men's needs, but it was actually what I wanted. And Mike really followed through with that. And then there have also been a couple, at least one men's gathering here locally, that is about prioritizing. What I hear is that it was about prioritizing women's safety in contact jams, and this person, Drew, went to it apparently. So he's much better. From what I hear, his intentions are much better, but he has certain blind spots around how he is in the space, and certainly how he reacts to someone naming his impact. So that where it's at now is that, and okay, so after talking to Mike, we were all going to have like a communal process where there were going to be some other witnesses in the room who are also contact jammers and have therapy background. And that was going to be happening, but then Drew changed his mind and just wants to have a meeting with men, which I'm actually okay with, because after that whole thing happened, I talked to somebody else who has really dealt with him and absolutely doesn't go to any dances because of this particular person might be there. So it's like, when I heard that, like, this is not acceptable. How is this acceptable?
Yeah.
So Mike is thinking about, and then he talked to that woman again because he didn't know how intense her reaction is to him, but he found that out through me bringing all this up. So there's like multiple
Got
perspectives
it.
kind of dancing in
Yeah.
together. So now where it's at now is that Drew just wants to have a meeting with men, and also he's leaving town for 4 months, so I won't have to deal with him. And this other woman potentially could come back and enjoy dancing, although she's you know she's been pretty scarred by this. um so that's where that's at. I was willing to be in this whole process to actually practice verbalizing and
Mm-hmm.
like giving feedback about my needs or like my experience to a guy,
Mm-hmm.
to like try to like undo internalized misogyny and sexism, and like develop my muscle of speaking my needs because I need that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that is at. That's just one person. But lately I had to verbalize after that whole thing. Then I wrote.
Let's pause because I just want to celebrate this moment because
Oh,
I feel it in the sort of like, I feel like kind of, I have an emotional response just in terms of thinking about all it took for you to be able to get to this point, that there's a year's worth of just this buildup, and 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 then this, that you have to have this direct confrontation, and then all these things have to happen in order to create this container. But the way in which this is where the emotion comes in, where the way in which you're taking a stand for
yeah.
for this clear boundary, and for your need to be in a safe space where you put, and the gift of that safe space. We were talking about safe and brave spaces on another call, is that actually it's a safe enough space for you to be brave, for you to be able to, there's a container and support, and so many of us, certainly we know now at this time, so many women are expressing how challenging it is for them to find that voice, and so I just want to celebrate this moment,
Yeah.
and
Thank you. It definitely has been like a new leaf, and at the same time, what's really just kind of like not exactly heavy, but just kind of cold reality feeling of it all is that this would not be possible without the authority and the position and the consciousness of Mike.
mm,
Like that's the thing. Like he's such a lever in this, and so it's such a lesson in like undoing oppression is that the people, like a member of that same group,
mhm,
you know, I'm not going to say has to be because that feels like too certain and absolute and not leaving space for other alternatives, but it really works when like a person of that same like dominant identity is taking responsibility for like not being the go-between. I don't know, I'm trying to like articulate, but really holding up like a mirror of like he's like I felt like because he's been been like under, like he is the one that's almost like supporting me to hear my own voice about like
mhm,
no, the safest thing, it sounds like what would be best is if he just wasn't there. I'm like,
mhm,
yeah. And even when he himself offered that, I had to verbalize to him like, yeah, you're right, like that's exactly what I want, and I have this like fear and contraction around making that happen, and like impacting somebody else to such an extent where like literally taking him out of the situation. But that's
mhm,
what I needed. And like that whole, it's like there's another layer of feeling of like just feeling like really like rightfully entitled to that is a
mhm,
whole other thing. Again, if Mike wasn't being the way he is being, this whole thing wouldn't have been possible.
mhm,
It's because of his own like really taking, not ownership, what is it, like taking it upon himself to really recognize, like I can feel that Mike really understands the power imbalance and how difficult it is for the person the role I'm playing and feeling to be like asserting up. So when
Yeah.
you talk about racism, is, it's like
Mhm.
Black people, like, they know that they can talk all they want, but unless white people goddamn take it up as their mantle to like on, I don't even know, like undo the privilege. I don't know, maybe that's not a, I don't even, anyway, so that's what I started to think about after that experience, because like like Mike doesn't necessarily lose anything from being a man by supporting me the way he is, but with race, and I'm just thinking out loud right now, like, but with
Mhm.
racism, it's like, a white person will actually be losing in this like uneven, messed up system by really going under, like, into the foundation, under like the needs for like whatever would look like reparations under people of color, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm.
Anyway, I have like more thoughts about this in terms of like emotional reparations that I'm sitting in the middle of. That, this is getting away from your topic, but it's just like another thing that I don't really know how to work through. I don't know,
Mm. Mm.
something
Mm.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a few things. First is just the acknowledgement that having a person, having this facilitator who is in a position of, well, both authority in the community
Yeah.
and, and in terms of his identity, has this shared identity with with this other man, and but he is really thinking about the ways in which he's holding his power and privilege in that context, and really knowing that the way in which it can be used um, in abusive ways, so trying to undo that is, and the other thing I'm hearing is that in you're also naming for yourself that part of what you had to wade through was your capacity to even see that this was happening. When you spoke about the fuzzy boundaries, that it took a year of feeling these, microaggressions, but this feeling these energetic sort of pushing upon your boundaries and then piling up before you could actually start to articulate, okay, this is a real thing, that this is happening, and I should respond to it. There needs to be a response to it. And I think that for many of us, there's I'm going to name the scene. Did you see the movie Get Out?
No.
Oh, you didn't?
I heard it was so violent, and I just have such a hard time with that.
I'm going to share a spoiler just because it's
Sure.
so meaningful to me, and
Yeah.
it's not going to, if you ever decide to see it. But there's a scene in the movie that's called The Sunken Place, and as a person of color, I saw that scene and I thought, I was like praising God that the scene was put on film, because for me what it captures is the way in which, when you are victim of systems of oppression, you actually believe yourself to be personally responsible for the ways in which you are receiving, you're on the receiving end of this victimization of this. And so you think, oh, it must be something I'm doing that I don't have access to these things, or that I can't get there as easily, or, and so I have a teacher in the constellations community. Let's see if I can get her language right. She says, I'm not going to get it quite right, but she talks about the ways in which we take systemic pressures and we internalize them as personal failings. And it can be very hard to shift that understanding, because, and we are a very, individual oriented society here in the United States. And we, this idea that if there's a problem, I will fix it. This individual, somehow it's all happening through here, I will take care of it. And so there's two sides in your story. One is your own awareness that this is actually not just this individual's problem, but this is an expression of a systemic problem. And the facilitator's awareness that he might be on the other side in terms of power and privilege, at least in terms of this sort of current paradigm. but that he still in the same way has to shift his understanding of this individual's actions and see how it relates to the system. So there's a kind of mirror image that's happening in this relationship. And what I'm hearing in what you're saying is that when that happens, it creates this incredible opportunity for something new to emerge. There's that undoing. What a gift, because that's what we're here for, right? Is to undo those systems. And you're encountering that in this moment, in your community.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's all quite it feels like frontier for us as a community here, and for me personally, for sure. And just the revelation of even though the conversation with Drew, the initial one, was uncomfortable, and I knew it would be, it just felt better to express myself, even if nothing was going to change. Because nothing was going to change without me saying anything. It was actually just getting worse because my tension was just accelerating around him. And so then I realized it's not fair to him because he has no idea what's going on in my head. And meanwhile, this energy is in the field, and it's there's a piece of it, I need to express myself to take care of myself. And this would be more fair for him to know this. And then as I was talking to somebody else to help me prepare for this too, is that kind of on the meta level, this Drew guy who doesn't understand how his aggressions and behavior are impacting people in a negative way, his higher self doesn't want to be doing this. He doesn't want to be perceived that way, or to have people rejecting him and him not understanding why. Mm-hmm. So it's okay. So even to speak to that part of me who feels like I have to take care of the other person at my own expense, which is very deeply ingrained from my childhood and something I have to repattern the heck out of. Mm-hmm. So even in that point, okay, this is going to be this painful, growing pain situation. So yeah, no, it could be interesting. It could be really, it's ideally, he would learn what he needs to learn to actually be a healer, sexual healer for women that he has this image of himself being, so right. That would be good. But you are not doing that right now. You are a perpetrator right now, is what some of us believe and feel. So yeah, I mean, it's really, it's the piece around the roles and whose role is it to do the work and the emotional labor. So again, Mike is taking up this responsibility, and that makes us feasible. I mean, he basically, so that article that we talked about, that lady, he posts it on our event page and group page, and he says it should be required reading for all Contact Improv practitioners, and after reading it, I absolutely agree. That would go a long way to changing the culture, because there's so many instances of this entitled touching that is not seen as an issue by the men. Mm-hmm. And I even after all the Me Too's and after we had our phone call, reading that article and the responses that she got from the men in Contact Improv community, it's you shouldn't be allowed to come in through the doors, is my response. So the sense of entitlement and the harassment she dealt with, and she's a respected dance person. Mm-hmm. And the thing about the young women that she writes, I mean, that happens constantly. People get turned off from Contact Improv constantly because they go in and they have this experience. And the people who have stayed in, like me, and people who've been in longer, we see it all the time. And there's some of us were I was thinking about, I don't know if I mentioned this on the other phone call that we had. I was thinking we should have a task force, a multi-gender task force in holding spaces for teaching ourselves and each other about all these pieces, because we're doing a disservice to the community and to the contact form and to its potential to really heal these things by not bringing it up at the surface and doing the hard work like what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. So So it's fascinating that this is like an entry point. Contact improv can be an entry point to these aspects, because the violations are so trackable because they're just physical. And so, and there's like data like that can be filmed, so it can be an entry point to be talking about these dynamics, the oppressive dynamics, and sometimes they're they get reversed and manipulated, so it can be, all of that can be seen in the space and in the field through contact. So I don't know, I'm kind of having like a brainstorm right now that we're talking, like, so I have a lot of experience in contact, and like I want to do conflict transformation, like maybe this could be combined practice and like developing some sort of trainings out of that. And there's a lot of that already, the different teachers do. So that's, yeah, it's just kind of I wonder how mainstreamable it is, talking about from the TRCC thing.
Well,
so
it's certainly it's a great opportunity. I mean, there's a need for what you're identifying, and of course people are developed. There's many people who may well see the need, but I would certainly encourage you, because I think there's something, the skill, there's a space, and then there's the experience. You said you can track the transgressions, because it's about physical contact. But then it's the next step, when you have the conversation, and to be able to hold those spaces, it can be so challenging, and especially because you get defensive right away, or a person can get defensive right away, right? Or I witnessed something. It was really actually quite lovely. I was grateful to be part of the bigger. It wasn't a. I think we were in a training that was like around healing and sexuality, and these two people had known each other from before, from a contact community, and there was this moment where she said he kept approaching her, and she kept saying no, and there was this way in which I could witness that her no was followed with an apology, and it reminded me of what you said about that fuzzy boundary place, that we often are conditioned. I certainly share that conditioning, that to say that you have to apologize right away to say no. And he seemed to not, he didn't get the no. It was as if he heard the apology. And so he would take what first started off as like, here's the boundary, and then the kind of softening of the boundary. And he said, oh, the boundary's softening, I can keep going. So there was this way in which he couldn't read the no, because it was, I don't know if this was the case, but I'm just saying energetically there's a space where when you're conditioned to apologize for your no, then this person may well have a hard time reading the no. And I think that that's a legitimate, there's multiple things that arise from there. First is, you need to learn how to read the no, to working in a consent-based culture, which just to me feels like thrilling, to just be moving into a space of taking the things that are often hidden, like, oh, here's all this energetic stuff and I'm feeling it right now, and this feels like a transgression, and how do we surface that and actually illuminate it and talk about it and bring us together into this consent-based culture. And it's part of the process. It includes finding a way to hold folks who are less skilled in working in that space. Oh, is that your phone?
Yeah, I just turned it off. Sorry about that. When you silence it.
And in this case that I'm describing, it actually took, it was a facilitated, like, it was almost like this moment kept happening. The woman said to the facilitator, this is happening. And then this entire process happened, which was, it was the two individuals, and then there were people behind them on each side supporting them, representing, like they may well have been in a kind of representation space, as in like representing their highest self, or representing the divine feminine and divine masculine, or something like that. But they were held and represented in multiple ways. And then there was a circle of witnesses, and then there was a facilitator. And so the facilitator could open up for each of them exactly what they needed, for this dialogue based process, but a dialogue process that was held in a really incredible container. And that allowed them to grow. It allowed them each to grow in ways that were beneficial for each person, you know. And he became super clear, you know, like part of me, you know, part of the, like there were these competing things. Can I express my desire? I would like this to happen. Can I ask for it? Right? And can I say no to that? You know, we wanted to create a space where both of those things were allowed. And, but it does take work. It takes real work. And it takes not just knowing how to dance, not knowing how to be in dance, physically move your body, but all of the other skills that are involved for all the next things, because for what's happening at all those levels, the energetic level, the communication stuff.
That really is interesting. So this process was specifically around their interactions and like the conflict that they were experiencing. Okay. What I was listening to that, I was recalling that part of my own personal reading of this particular person, Drew's mode, is that he wasn't accepting a no. He was getting a no in so many clear ways, but he didn't want it to be the fact. And so the pretense was that he didn't understand, but it was really that he was resisting it. I'm not talking, so this is about my experience. And so I even talked to a mutual friend of ours that really likes him. But when I said to her, this is my actual really accurate, honest reading. She agreed. She's like, I think you're right. You know, then that's the piece around. So let's say, like, just to be general about it for the sake of the discussion, like, there's like the entitlement comes in with the desire in misogyny, right? And then and then on the flip side, the like, if the honest response is no, it comes in with like a sense of guilt and shame that I'm saying no.
Exactly.
And that's so twisted. I mean, and that is like such a recipe for abuse on so many levels, like micro level aggressions, like where it took me a year to be like, basically stop fucking running at me.
Yes.
You know, whereas I've even told like other friends, punch this guy in the face, you know, so like I was talking around him for a year because there's just like, where do I take this? Our culture doesn't allow me to be like, yo, or, you know, and so it like literally, so it requires like each individual woman to do my work of like self-empowerment. So I'm like, okay, our culture is not the most supportive, but my word is at least going to be in there.
Yeah.
If I say it. If I don't say it, I can't, you know, blame everything on everybody else, you know. So anyway, and so it's like, so there's the part of it with like the guys where, or the, like, let's say like the entitlement conditioning where, you know, have you heard this phrase, which I think like really encapsulates everything perfectly. It says, when you're used to privilege, equality looks like oppression. I mean, it's like, drop the mic, that's it. That's the explanation, everybody. End of story, you know? So, yeah, like, are used to privilege when it comes to women's bodies, and, you know, they don't even see their entitlement. I mean, it's insane. So anyway, so it's like, so for that person in that process that you were describing, like, if the facilitator can say like, okay, your desire is not an issue. Like, we want you to have your desire, for God's sakes. Like, please don't let that go away. It's like, it's the pressure that you like couple with a desire and you think is part of like, you know, something that is okay to like put on a person. And then, you know, basically, like, do you really want a yes in that context? Because you want her to really want you, not because she felt pressured to say yes. I mean, that, because that affects the experience of connection for everybody. So in order for it to be a real, like, clean thing that both people want, you know, in general, then like that entitlement has to go and that shame has to go on all sides.
Let's take a moment with this, because this is really, for me, one of my favorite like my personal, like where I'm at when I'm doing this inquiry, it's really, for me, what I'm hearing in that, or the way I've come to see that, is when you're just talking about entitlement and privilege, that there are ways in which, like as you said, desire, when it arises in the context of entitlement and privilege versus when it arises in the context of oppression, systemic oppression, like that those channels those pressures lead desire down very different channels, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so part of my inquiry becomes, well, how can we respond to the arising of desire, or of that energetic creative space, the creative life force space of eros, in ways that are not patterned, and and I think that it's, you're experiencing in your community that it's not easy. You can't just decide that that's something you would like to do and somehow it magically comes about. It's actually because it's I'm a homeschooling and an unschooling parent, and that's a very radical approach to learning, which is really just means we're always learning, and I'm and a child can be self-directed and we can trust that, which I'll be honest, I still struggle with, but I it's been such a powerful metaphor for me, because one of the things we do in an unschooling practice is you enter into a period of deschooling. And that period looks like, to a conventional view, like a kind of chaos, because the child, you just really let them become fully self-directed. And if that means you're going to play video games for 5 hours, you just let it go, because you're in a period you need to unschool. You need to sort of get yourself out of the conditioning. And so much of the conditioning is really, like, we don't see it. That's the nature of it. We don't see the water that we're swimming in. And let me finish. You can say hi because I'm talking about you, and so I think we are in. There's ways in which you have to. The community needs to find ways to support, hopefully in healthy ways. Now, when you're talking about me and my children, like, it's a very small system. It's me and the kids, and I can create a safe container. And you're talking about a community and multiple relationships, but there's still, I think, a sort of a social transition space to move from the place of conditioning to the place of seeing the conditioning and rewiring that can look very messy. We don't know how to do it, and we have to just have the courage to sort of try with whatever tools we have available right now. Not the perfect tools, perhaps, because we haven't refined them. We haven't done it enough. But I've really come to appreciate that people have the courage to move into what can be very messy spaces, so that way we can all learn. My sense is that information actually ultimately becomes part of a field of information. We as human beings have learned together. When you've tried it there and you tried it there, that somehow there's a way in which it becomes part of collective wisdom, even if it hasn't been directly transmitted to me, that eventually it becomes easier for somebody else when that next conversation happens, because you've had that conversation.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I'll say about this is that, there's so much actually very ancient knowledge about how to work with the arising of desire. I just had a conversation yesterday with a woman, and she's a sex and love and relationship coach.
Cool.
And she talks about how, when the feelings arise, when arousal comes into your body, that you could just acknowledge it and move the energy, just breathe with, just ways in which, like, literally working with it as an energetic. But instead, because of our conditioning and whatever our own personal stuff is, it arises, and then there's a reaction, often a sort of unseen, unexamined reaction,
Mm-hmm.
that leads us down all these other channels that are, not healthy. It can be not healthy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say briefly that in terms of that celebration piece you named earlier, after that day when I had two major conversations with the facilitator that sandwiched his conversation with the problem person for the moment, then I like allowed, or it happened, or probably both ways, that there are two other people who have repeatedly been invasive, and I just, is it okay to talk about it? Oh
yeah, well, I'm on. Yeah.
Okay. And then having had that process and just feeling like, okay, no, I have a right to claim my personal body space and what's comfortable and not comfortable. I just messaged the two other people, and one had a pretty narcissistic reaction, and I just said, I'm not talking about this. I'll block you. And I did. And the other one just said, okay. He didn't apologize or anything, but he said, okay, and hasn't like touched me again. And the one that said, okay, the thing that I said to him, you came up from behind me and you touched me on my back. Please do not do that at all. I do not like being surprised from behind. And that specific thing is named in this article in that lady. It's like just that part of like this like manipulative sneaky BS of touching somebody from behind without making eye contact because you're basically too afraid to ask for consent. That's going to get you a no, in like a permanent no. So like hopefully they're learning that part around like how it costs them to not be respectful of the potential violation of their behavior.
I'm almost done, Joanna.
So anyway, so that
I just want to, so let's just celebrate that. That's just so, that's really fabulous. It's so great. Like I'm like genuinely moved by that. Yeah. And may it be an inspiration for all of us, that we build that courage. I have like, I'm at the top of the hour.
Yeah.
But there's something I'll say, and I'll see if I can say it in just 90 seconds or less, which is that one of the things I've come to understand is that the mechanism of harm looks a certain way. I think I did talk about this, maybe. I don't know if you were on that call, but which is that there is a vector of desire, of some kind of arising of desire, and then there's a boundary, and this is what harm looks like. That this keeps bumping up against that boundary. And the thing is, what occurred to me is that the mechanism of courage actually looks the same way. That actually, when you say to someone, no, you cannot come up and touch me without from behind like that, that actually to that other person that can feel like a kind of harm, because you've expressed your need, and they felt it as some kind of however they're perceiving it. And so there is something interesting to me that it takes as much, we're playing in the field where energetically we're working on how can I express my needs and how can I affirm my boundaries. And there is a bigger field than just the need and the boundary, because there's also this other piece around consent, around respect, around the fact that we actually cannot live on this planet without, in some ways, causing harm. I cannot eat, even if I'm just a vegetarian, I have to kill the vegetable, I have to pull it out of the ground, So there's always going to be a time when my need requires, actually, in some way, somebody else to relinquish a boundary. And yet, we can do it in ways that are mindful, or we can do it in ways that are entitled and mindless. And that's, in a lot of ways, I feel like that makes all the difference for the kind of planet we want to live on. Can we learn to live in ways that honors the fact that this is going to happen? It's the nature of our being here. And that we can actually create a much more beautiful, and in fact, once you do that, it's no longer harm. There's a way in which you can, I can imagine that the system will respond when we learn how to honor each other and care for each other in a much more respectful and holistic way. That's the vision.
Woo! Sparkle, sparkle, sparkle. That's a beautiful vision. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really terrific. I'm really glad.
I'm glad. Hopefully it's useful for your project.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely is.
Good.
All right, Nina, thank you so much. Have a great solstice. You're
Thank
welcome to
you.
come here if you
I
want to.
know, but I try to zoom in, or I'm going to a solstice celebration tomorrow night with the big fire. So I hope to
Mhm.
add some pictures to your
Oh,
collage.
good.
Yeah, I'm
Do
sorry I
that.
can't attend in person. It's a long drive.
Yeah, true. It is true.
Like 3 hours one way for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Bye,
Okay.
Nina.
Enjoy. Take care. Bye.
Bye.